In the year 1941, moviegoers across America flocked to theaters to see Errol Flynn portray George Armstrong Custer in the classic Western They Died with Their Boots On. The film was a massive hit, painting Custer as a noble, swashbuckling hero who died a martyr while trying to protect Native American lands from greedy gold seekers. It was a beautiful, stirring story that cemented Custer's legend for a generation. But there is a major problem with that story. Almost every single bit of it is a complete lie. In reality, Custer wasn't a saint protecting the Black Hills. He was the very man who announced the discovery of gold there, effectively breaking a peace treaty and starting a war. This wasn't just a small mistake by a Hollywood director. It was a deliberate choice to trade the messy truth of history for a polished, profitable myth. Western movies have long been the primary way we learn about the American frontier. For over a century, these films have shaped how we view cowboys, lawmen, and the tribes of the Great Plains. But if you look closely at some of the most famous Westerns ever made, you'll find a landscape filled with architectural errors, impossible timelines, and characters who bear little resemblance to the people they were meant to portray. From John Wayne's massive version of the Alamo to the Avengers-style gathering of Civil War generals who were never actually in the same room, Hollywood has a long history of playing fast and loose with the facts. Today, we're going to look at the top 10 most inaccurate Western movies of all time and uncover the real history that was left on the cutting room floor. We begin with a film from 1940 called Santa Fe Trail. Despite the name, the movie has almost nothing to do with the famous trade route. Instead, it follows J.E.B. Stuart and his fight against the abolitionist John Brown. The most glaring error is what historians call the West Point fantasy. The script gathers a merry band of brothers in the graduating class of 1854 that includes J.E.B. Stuart, George Armstrong Custer, Philip Sheridan, James Longstreet, George Pickett, and John Bell Hood. In reality, these men graduated years apart. James Longstreet graduated in 1842, while George Custer didn't finish until 1861. Mathematically, the age disparity between Custer and Longstreet was 19 years. Custer would have been a mere child of 14 or 15 at the time the film depicts him as a graduating cadet. Furthermore, the film's depiction of the capture of John Brown at Harper's Ferry in 1859 shows Stuart leading a cavalry charge. Official government reports confirm the assault was actually carried out by U.S. Marines under the command of Robert E. Lee. Stuart was merely a courier and negotiator. Moving forward to 1941, we see a continued pattern of fabrication in They Died with Their Boots On. This film furthered the hagiography of George Armstrong Custer, transforming a controversial, vain martinet into a hero and defender of Native American rights. One of the most profound inversions concerns the discovery of gold in the Black Hills. The film depicts Custer as a tragic figure trying to maintain peace with the Lakota, only to be thwarted by an evil businessman who fakes a gold discovery to spark a war. Primary source records, including 1874 expedition logs and the Bismarck Tribune, confirm that Custer himself announced the discovery of gold, violating the Treaty of Fort Laramie and triggering the Great Sioux War. The film also sanitizes Custer's erratic behavior. While Errol Flynn's Custer is a disciplined soldier, the real Custer amassed 726 demerits at West Point, one of the worst conduct records in history, and struggled with alcoholism during his early career. He was actually a scholarship student from a poor household, not the wealthy dandy seen on screen. In 1960, John Wayne took on the legendary story of the Alamo. Wayne viewed the story as a great piece of folklore and used it to convey Cold War-era messages about sacrifice. To fit his larger-than-life vision, Wayne's Alamo was built at a significantly larger scale than the historical mission. Geographically, the film features mountains in the background, even though the Alamo is located in the flat, hilly terrain of San Antonio. Tactically, the battle is depicted as a long daylight struggle, but historical consensus and the De La Pena diary confirm the final assault was a pre-dawn operation lasting between 30 and 90 minutes. The film portrays Davy Crockett blowing up a powder magazine, a heroic fiction. Primary sources suggest Crockett and several other defenders surrendered and were executed under Santa Anna's orders. Jim Bowie is shown fighting on his cot with pistols, but historical records suggest he likely died of illness, specifically typhoid pneumonia, before or during the breach. In 1956, John Ford gave us The Searchers, which is hailed as a masterpiece but remains historically tenuous. The film is loosely based on the life of Cynthia Ann Parker, who was kidnapped by Comanches in 1836. However, the film reverses the emotional outcome of her life. While the film ends with the rescue of the character and her return to white society, the real Cynthia Ann Parker integrated fully into Comanche life, married a chief named Peta Nocona, and bore 3 children. When she was recaptured by Texas Rangers 24 years later, she did not want to return to white civilization and spent the remainder of her life attempting to escape back to the Comanche before dying of grief. Even the setting is a fabrication. John Ford shot the film in Monument Valley, Utah, which has permanently distorted the public's image of the Texas landscape. The Comanche were actually nomadic warriors of the limestone plains and rolling prairies of North Texas, which looks nothing like the massive sandstone buttes of the Navajo Nation. Revisionist westerns like the 1990 film Dances with Wolves attempted to correct decades of problematic portrayals, but fell into the white savior trope and cultural misrepresentation. To elevate the Lakota Sioux, the film portrays the Pawnee as feared, malicious villains. Historical records show the Pawnee were a peaceful farming tribe, whose population was devastated by Lakota raids, dropping from 12,000 in 1830 to just 2,000 by 1875. This demographic collapse was why the Pawnee scouted for the U.S. Army. It was a strategy for survival against Lakota expansion. Linguistically, the film failed as well. Male characters often speak Lakota in the feminine form because the dialogue coach had insufficient knowledge of the language's complex gendered grammar. Furthermore, the film implies the Sioux had a distaste for guns, whereas historical records confirmed they were highly skilled with firearms and often better armed than the 7th Cavalry. In 1993, the movie Tombstone brought the legend of Wyatt Earp back to the screen, prioritizing myth over the actual court records of the Spicer hearing. The title itself is a misnomer. The shootout occurred in a narrow, vacant lot between Fly's boarding house and the Harwood House, a block away from the actual corral. The film depicts a sprawling, tactical battle in an open lot, but primary sources and maps confirm it was a frantic, 30-second brawl in a space only 15 to 20 feet wide. The cowboys in the film are identified by red sashes, an invention of Hollywood with no basis in the historical record. Even the iconic buntline special, carried by Wyatt Earp, is almost certainly a myth coined by a biographer in 1931. Earp likely carried a Smith & Wesson Model 3 with an 8-inch barrel on the day of the fight. The film also shows Ike Clanton grabbing a gun and shooting, but in reality he fled in terror at the start of the fight. The 1970 film Little Big Man was a groundbreaking revisionist western, but it used satire to the point of historical distortion. It portrays George Armstrong Custer as a literal lunatic at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, screaming and flailing. While Custer was vain and impulsive, this depiction was intended as a commentary on the Vietnam War, rather than an accurate representation of his tactical state of mind in 1876. The film also reverses the chronology of the Sand Creek and Washita massacres. While it accurately depicts the Washita River encounter as a surprise attack on a peaceful village, it omits the presence of warriors in the camp, making the engagement look more one-sided than the desperate and ugly reality where some resistance occurred. Historically, Custer's men slaughtered over 800 Cheyenne horses at Washita, specifically to cripple the tribe's mobility and survival. The 2015 film The Revenant is praised for its realism, yet its central emotional core, the murder of Hugh Glass's son, is a complete fabrication. The real Hugh Glass had no recorded children, and there is no evidence he was ever married to a Pawnee woman. The character of Hawk was invented for a modern revenge plot. In reality, Glass's motivation for his 200-mile crawl was the recovery of his stolen rifle and the betrayal of being left for dead. The film is set in a brutal, frozen winter, but historical records, including the Journal of William Ashley, confirm the bear attack and trek took place in the summer and early autumn of 1823. Furthermore, the film ends with Glass killing John Fitzgerald in a violent duel, but in reality, Glass caught up to Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger and eventually forgave them both. In 1969, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became the quintessential example of spirit over fact. The film ends with a heroic freeze-frame charge against hundreds of soldiers. Historical evidence from Bolivia and Pinkerton records suggests a much bleaker end. Trapped in a small house, Cassidy likely shot a mortally wounded Sundance to end his suffering and then took his own life. There were no hundreds of soldiers, but rather a localized shootout with a small military detachment. The film also omits the more violent aspects of the duo's career. Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker, was a charismatic but calculated thief whose relatively non-violent reputation was a marketing tool. The film also avoids the ambiguity of his fate, as family members claimed for years that he actually survived and returned to the United States in secret. Finally, the 2013 reboot of The Lone Ranger is criticized for its simplified depiction of Native Americans, but its deepest inaccuracy lies in the whitewashing of the cowboy archetype. Western movies have historically focused on white protagonists, perpetuating the myth that the frontier was a white space. In reality, nearly 25 to 30% of cowboys in the 19th century were black. The Lone Ranger himself is often theorized to be based on Bass Reeves, a black U.S. Marshal who captured over 3,000 outlaws, yet the film continues to cast the role as a white savior. Tonto, played by Johnny Depp, relies on the noble savage trope, a simplification that ignores the complex cultures of tribes like the Comanche. The term cowboy was originally a derogatory term for black ranch hands, while white workers were called cowmen. Which of these historical inaccuracies surprised you the most, or do you think some myths are worth keeping for the sake of a good story? Let me know in the comments below.